Hello, hello. This is VocStories, audiobooks by Cathi. Today we're going to hear episode 3 of The Wedding Crasher by Nikki Stern. Special Agent Terry Sloan makes his way up from the FBI field office in Tampa to Byrdstown, Tennessee. Along the way, he thinks about love, past and present, but mostly about his obsession with bringing the wedding crasher to justice. Meanwhile, Sam and Abdi visit the shop selling vintage wedding dresses, where they meet the delightfully eccentric Hattie McCoy. Special Agent Terry Sloan poured himself a cup of coffee and inhaled, willing the hot beverage to wash away his exhaustion. He pushed back the sliding door and walked onto the small balcony. In the pre-dawn dark, twinkling lights illuminated the Sunshine Skyway Bridge. Twin sail-like structures at the bridge's center gave the illusion of motion across the Gulf's inky waters. Brilliant design. Gorgeous views. Literally a jumping-off point for the desperate people who decided to end their lives. He looked at his watch. 4 o'clock. "Mercy, you didn't have to get up just for me," he told the woman who followed him outside to lean against his back and wrap her arms around his waist. "I don't mind. I wanted to see you off. Besides, it's only an hour and a half before I usually get up. Think of how much more I can get done today." Terry had no doubt she'd cram in a lot before she headed into her office at WFLA, Tampa Bay's leading local news station. He considered the long ride he had ahead of him. 10.5 hours, not including the stop he intended to make in Atlanta. That would eat up the day. Still, he looked forward to it. Driving relaxed him. I-75 offered nothing in the way of remarkable scenery, but the route was efficient. And away from here. Mercy squeezed as if she'd never let go. "How long did you say you'd be gone?" He looked down again, noting she was dressed. A second glance told him she wore one of his shirts. He fought off claustrophobia. 3 days or 3 weeks. I can't be sure. Depends on what Sheriff Tate and I determine is the best course of action after going over the evidence. You know the drill." "You trust this small-town sheriff?" She tried for lighthearted, but he couldn't miss the apprehension in her voice. "I trust Sam Tate with my life," he said. The strain left her small body. She smiled up at him. "I'm glad you said that. I feel better." She hugged him once more and released him. Terry realized he'd been holding his breath. He turned to face her, holding her arms lightly, holding her away. He had to look down. Mercedes Rodriguez, at just over 5 feet, didn't even reach his shoulder. He could see how rivals, colleagues, even her employers might once have underestimated her. That is, until her grit and determination vaulted the affiliate to first place and earned it a Peabody nomination. Now, both the New York and Washington NBC news bureaus had their eyes on her. She hadn't yet turned 30. Though a powerhouse on air and in her dogged pursuit of a story, she remained insecure about her personal relationships. Terry understood. A volatile father, an early failed marriage, a succession of disappointing men. No wonder she found his apparent steadiness a comfort. Terry didn't expect to end up in Tampa. You went where you were sent, particularly when you've been allowed to stay on while you work through your issues. It wasn't so bad. He lived in a condo with a terrific view of the bay. His commute was far shorter than when he lived in D.C. Traffic was light, except in February. He enjoyed far better weather. As a bonus, he met Mercy Rodriguez. Her piece on his role in the takedown of a violent criminal made him out to be some kind of hometown hero. He heard from old friends, even made some new ones. HQ seemed pleased. Terry almost believed he might turn his life around. Almost. Mercy was strong and sexy, with plenty of experience in and out of bed. She knew the best places to eat, the most fun people to hang with, the movers and the money people in and around Tampa. He loved her energy and the attention she heaped on him. He enjoyed being part of a couple. She eased his grief. Her attention made him feel complete, at least on the surface. Mercy didn't want surface, though. She wanted attachment, roots. He should have seen it, but he wasn't paying attention. At some point, she decided she'd found her man, someone she respected, trusted, and loved. Someone who would be her rock, her harbor, her safe spot forever. Terry Sloan. Terry couldn't pretend to be any of those things. Not for her. Maybe not ever again, for anyone. He just didn't know how to tell her. Terry Sloan, who had faced psychopaths and predators, who had hunted down drug lords and depraved killers, couldn't handle the expectations of one small woman. "I gotta get going," he said. "I'll call you from the road." "Promise?" She lifted her face up for a kiss. "Absolutely," Terry replied. He brushed her lips with his, picked up his bag, and walked out. He heard her call out, "Text me," and delivered an over-the-shoulder wave without looking. The guilt hit like a sledgehammer. He hadn't hurt Mercy yet, but he would. The oppressive heat followed him north and into Georgia. Barely April and the temperatures were into the 80s. He turned the air conditioning in the Prius to high. It didn't help. Terry had never grown used to hot and steamy weather. He'd been raised in Colorado, where spring arrived on dry air and blue skies that served as a backdrop to jagged snow-capped mountains. At least the drive was quiet. Terry kept the radio off when he drove. The silence and the blur of scenery out his window soothed him. The zen of the whoosh, a friend called it. As he pulled at his iced coffee, his mind zeroed in on the latest iteration of the case that had attracted and plagued him over the course of 4 years. How did the wedding crasher choose Bitsy Newsom from Nashville? What was she doing in remote Pickett County anyway? Working? Playing? At least he could find out that much. Meanwhile, he'd get to partner with Pickett County Sheriff Sam Tate. Sam Tate, the star of the Tennessee Law Enforcement Academy the year he visited to talk to the students about investigative work. Her classmates couldn't get over the striking-looking woman with the criminal justice degree and the glamorous past as a singer and then a lieutenant with an elite all-women's unit stationed in Afghanistan. They fell all over themselves to impress her, as did most of the instructors. Terry, who'd once considered joining the behavioral analysis unit, couldn't resist profiling the capable young woman. Friendly, but closed off. Flashes of humor along with a deep-seated anger. Pain tucked away beneath the reserved exterior. He wondered if the sorrow that trailed her like a veil made her professional and personal lives more difficult. By the time they met again, she'd left her job with MNPD. Something about stress. He could relate. The aneurysm that felled his pregnant young wife nearly ended him. His deep dive into pills and booze earned him an involuntary transfer to a field office in Tampa. Just another widower in Florida, albeit younger and still working. At least the wedding crasher filled his mind and ate up his time. Yes, other cases intervened, other pleasures and irritations made themselves known. But something happened to him each March. Anticipation. Excitement. The smell of blood or the thrill of the chase, he couldn't say. He made good time and reached the Atlanta office before lunch to touch base with the lead agent on the Natalie Garcia murder. Terry preferred personal interaction to texts, emails, or phone calls. He planned to meet later with Daryl Cutler up in Cookeville, the FBI satellite office nearest to Byrdstown. Cutler would be the local lead, as he had been on the Hooper investigation, though Terry remained the overall special case agent. A mixed blessing to be the face of an unsolved string of homicides. He heard Lena Small's smooth contralto as he stepped off the elevator inside the FBI's Atlanta headquarters. "Terry Sloan, as I live and breathe. Come on in." Lena wore a well-cut gray suit with rust-colored pumps and a striking copper necklace. Her spiky, silver-streaked hair perfectly complemented her oval face and café au lait complexion. As usual, she projected an assured confidence. A talented field agent and an admired administrator, she was married to a rising local politician. Each of them harbored aspirations that went beyond Atlanta. Terry entered her air-conditioned office and took a moment to admire the mix of artwork, laudatory letters, and photographs with local and national celebrities. Without a doubt, the woman was going places. "Sit down, Terry." She gestured to a comfortable chair. "How's Florida?" He grinned. "Hot and muggy, just like here. So when are you running for office?" "Slow down, hombre. Let's not get ahead of ourselves." Her smile and the twinkle in her eye told him the idea had crossed her mind. "First, I have a case to close. It would appear we're chasing the wedding crasher again." She leaned back in her chair and cocked her head. "And what do you know? He's reappeared right back in Sam Tate's county. That should be interesting for you." "Lena, I don't know what you heard." "Doesn't matter what I heard, Terry. 2 colleagues working on an ugly case, both of them single, each of them recovering from a devastating loss." She shrugged. "Ancient history." "Is it?" He put up a hand. "The only thing I can think about right now is the return of our perp after a 2-year hiatus. I've got to take a look at every piece of the puzzle. I've got questions without answers." "Then let's talk it through. I ordered in from the Cuban sandwich place. Hope you're hungry." "For Cuban? Always." They discussed the specifics of Natalie Garcia's murder over lunch at Lena's desk. Terry had already consulted with 2 agents from the Florida Bureau of State Investigations, who'd worked the Barnes and Kopech homicides, he told her. "No changes in methodology?" Lena asked. "The only difference is the missed year, and the repeat location. The killer is in Pickett County. Or traveled north and circled back." "Uh-huh." Lena put down her sandwich. "You don't believe that, and neither do I. Something has tied the wedding crasher to Pickett County. Maybe the same thing that resulted in the year off." "Real life?" They turned to other topics. Terry promised to keep his colleague in the loop. Then he pushed on, his belly full and his mind in overdrive. The killer would be caught. Terry believed that without hesitation. He considered what the end would mean for him. What would consume him? More significantly, what would keep him sane? He didn't yet trust himself and didn't want to rely on any of his acquaintances. Self-medication hadn't eased his insistent grief. Mercy did her best to fill the hole. For all the love she offered, love he didn't deserve, she couldn't release him from the prison of his own pain. Only the wedding crasher seemed capable of doing that. Yes, the murders angered him. Of course he ached for the families of the victims. Yet he couldn't deny that the killer's reappearance ignited a flame deep within him. He felt focused, alive, repurposed, renewed. Was that sick? Part of what made him a damn good investigator? Or both? And what about Sam Tate? How did the latest murder affect her? She relished a challenge, that much he knew. Still, she faced a lot of pressure over this case. From a public worried that a killer lived among them, from the burden of her own painful past. The stress could knock her off her game. Not gonna happen, he reminded himself. The Sam he remembered, the whip-smart trainee, the no-bullshit detective, the passionate woman, wasn't some tightly wrapped bundle of neurosis. She was a fearless and resolute officer of the law. The wedding crasher's return might stir up old memories. It would also imbue her with a sense of purpose. No ritual-worshipping, bride-loving fetishist was going to terrorize her county. Not while Sam Tate was sheriff. She would kick his ass, and Terry would be by her side when they took the serial killer down once and for all. About when Terry left the Atlanta field office, Sam and Abdi pushed open the door to Hattie's vintage wedding shop in Livingston. Tinny mechanical trumpets played the first 4 notes of the wedding march. It was an odd little announcement, yet in keeping with the kitschy appearance of the place. Sam broke into a cold sweat that had nothing to do with their passage out of the humid day into the chilled store. She didn't want anything to do with weddings. Ceremonies these days were nothing more than part performance art, part competition, and part fairy tale. An entire industry had grown around thoroughly unrealistic expectations about love, fealty, happiness, and even memory. Perception mattered. Whoever has the biggest, most elaborate celebration wins. Bitsy and others like her had willingly, sometimes urgently, participated in the sham. That wasn't the only reason Sam detested the entire process of planning and implementing the ritual. In her experience, weddings weren't cause for celebration. Although small, the store was crammed. Dresses, there must have been 100 or more, hung from racks or draped across chairs. Tulle, chiffon, silk, and lace gowns in every imaginable style seemed to dance around them. She'd never seen so many variations on white. Shades like ivory, pearl, cream, and snowdrop. "These are all vintage?" Sam asked in a low voice. "What does that even mean anymore?" "Anything not made in the last, 20 years, I'd guess," Abdi replied. "Newer than that, it's used. Pre-20th century, you'd be dealing in antique couture." Sam gave her detective the side eye. "You seem to know a lot about it." "I have a lot of women in my life," he laughed. "I've been in these stores." A stout woman pushed through a set of curtains in the back and hurried to them. She had piled her flame-colored hair carelessly on top of her head. Her low-cut lavender dress emphasized her ample cleavage. With the addition of a bright yellow scarf, she stood out among the pale couture like an early spring crocus. Sam pegged her as perhaps late 50s. "Welcome, welcome! Thank you for coming." The voice was high and youthful. The accent suggested upper-class Southern breeding. Above her wide smile, her small blue eyes moved back and forth between Abdi and Sam. The two of them had decided against wearing uniforms. Sam's badge, clipped at the waist of her jeans, was hidden by her blazer. Without so much as a twitch, the cheerful shopkeeper said, "The happy couple, I presume." Maybe times really were changing, Sam thought. Maybe the woman had a diverse clientele with a shared love of old dresses. Or maybe she believed in covering her bases. "Actually, I'm Pickett County Sheriff Samantha Tate, ma'am." She pointed at her badge and produced her identification. "And this is Detective Abdi Isson. Are you the proprietor?" "I am indeed. 35 years now." She cocked her head, an inquisitive bird with bright plumage and a sharp eye. "What brings a neighboring county sheriff and her detective to my shop? This wouldn't have to do with the body someone discovered in the park yesterday, would it?" "Why would you say that?" Abdi asked. "Now, detective, it's pretty hard to keep such a thing quiet. It's not as if this area has a lot of bodies lying around, although I suppose the drugs are killing off more than a few these days. I stay informed thanks to a well-placed network of fellow busybodies. I'm in the business of dressing brides, for heaven's sake." "So, is it him? The wedding crasher? Should I warn my customers? Are you bringing in that handsome FBI agent who worked the other case?" Sam fought the urge to pivot and flee. "Ms. McCoy. Henrietta Courtney McCoy. You may call me Hattie." "I know, Hattie McCoy. It seemed funny at the time." "Of course, now that my husband is gone." "Oh, I'm sorry," Sam said instinctively. "My dear sheriff, don't be. He left me for his young secretary years ago. She in turn left him for another woman after bankrupting the fool. He's living on scraps, last I heard, while I am making quite a nice living selling to clients all over the world. I hope his ex comes to me. I'd love to outfit 2 women. As you may have gathered, I'm a great fan of karma. She chuckled amiably. Ms. McCoy, we're very early into our investigation. We hope to know more in the next few days. Well, I shall follow the news then. Is all your merchandise from past eras? Abdi asked. It is. We have nothing made after the 1980s. I stopped just before the onset of grunge, which had a deleterious effect on bridal fashion, let me tell you. Some of the dresses in the 90s even featured rips. Can you imagine? I realize it's in style with $200 jeans, but a dress you wear in a commitment ceremony. She made a dismissive gesture, as if she were shooing away an irritating insect. The 1980s was the height of repurposed romanticism, she continued. That look is becoming popular again, by the way, without all the excessive headpieces, thank goodness. The other popular looks are from the late 1950s. One style features a sweetheart neckline and a small waist and full skirt. I like to call it the Doris Day Virgin look. Don't be shocked, Detective. We trade in fantasies. She ran her hand lightly over the gowns nearest her. The Hollywood glamour designs from the late 50s are my favorite, she continued. The full or A-line skirt remained, you see, but the necklines became more daring. Though not by today's standards. A bateau neck or cowl, cap sleeves, even strapless gowns. Nothing anyone would find at a local garage sale, but I shop all over the world. Silk or taffeta, some chiffon, tulle, and lace. Such fun! I can see why you'd love the film-inspired designs, Abdi said. They really do flatter a woman's figure. Not everyone wants to be a princess, I'd imagine. Besides, taffeta and silk drape nicely, and silk has the advantage of working well in sticky weather. Why, Detective, you do know something about dressing a woman, Hattie replied coyly. Is it an interest of yours? Something you do in your spare time? I have 5 sisters, ma'am, 2 of whom were recently married, and a girlfriend who would probably like to be. They've supplied me with my education. Hattie's laugh rang out like church bells. What about alterations? Sam asked. Do you provide that service? We may. Often as not, whoever buys the dress does her own needlework or has her personal seamstress or tailor do it. There are several men and women who specialize in working with older and presumably more fragile material. Fine by me. The money's in the sales. Do you sell other accessories? Veils, shoes, garters? Headbands, veils, and some handbags, yes. Used shoes? Never. She gave a shudder. The brides go on eBay or Etsy. Sometimes they may try a thrift shop, or they buy a perfectly plain shoe that could come from any era after 1940. You'd be surprised how many modern brides wear low-heeled pumps, Mary Janes, or even flats. Comfort is in. Sam's attention was caught by a dress with a capped-sleeve brocade top, fitted with darts. The skirt, chiffon over lightweight taffeta, flared out from a nipped-in waist. She fingered the material. I see you in something a little sleeker, Sheriff, Hattie said. Long sheath with a subtle slit up one side. Do you remember what that actress wore when she married England's Prince Harry? Very Audrey Hepburn. Something along those lines. Sam blushed. Me? Oh, no, I'm not in the market. I was wondering what something like this would cost. That's a designer dress, Hattie said. Worn once. Sells for $1,200. The dresses start at $450 and go up to $3,500 or $4,000, mainly because the clothes are in impeccable condition. I have one gown here I won't sell for less than $10,000. Even at the low end, that represented a sizable investment for a serial killer, Sam thought. Unless he was a spare-no-expense kind of guy. She looked over at Abdi and knew he was calculating the cost as well. He'd moved down the rows of dresses and was studying a high-neck chiffon number. "Where do you get your dresses?" "Well, as I said, all over. Estate sales, auctions, and the like. I've got people looking for me in North Carolina, Texas, Louisiana, Kentucky, sometimes New York City and Los Angeles, though the prices tend to be too high. I even have a scout outside London and another in the suburbs of Paris." "That's impressive," Abdi said. "And how much of your business is mail order?" "More than half, if you can believe it. I still get walk-ins, mostly local, but the number of people willing to buy dresses without trying them on has grown." The proprietor crossed her arms over her generous bosom. "I don't feel as if I'm being all that helpful, officers, especially if you want to know if a killer walked into my shop and bought a dress. We don't see too many men, but there are enough of them. As for orders through the mail, I don't really know who's on the other end, do I?" "Can you tell whether this is one of your dresses?" Sam handed her phone to the woman. On it was a shot of the dress Bitsy Newsome had been wearing when her body was discovered. Hattie pulled up a pair of reading glasses tethered to an ornate chain around her neck and peered through them. She shook her head. "I can't say for certain. It would help to see the dress itself and not a picture of it. I suspect it started as a strapless gown, though. Were the sleeves added later, do you know?" "Forensics says the fabric that makes up the body of the dress dates back 60 or 70 years ago, and the rest is new." "I can believe that. The sleeves are at odds with the rest of the dress. This piece of added fabric," Hattie touched the screen with a red-tipped nail, "creates a completely different neckline. Perhaps this is someone's idea of modesty, but frankly, it ruins the look. I don't know why anyone would buy a vampy gown and then cannibalize it. Except, oh dear." She handed Sam the photo as if it were a hot potato. "Was this worn by the latest victim?" "I'm afraid it was. Perhaps you have receipts from, say, January to March of this year?" Sam had no way of knowing whether the crasher shopped here, but she couldn't leave anything to chance. "I'll get those for you." Hattie went back through the curtains and returned a moment later with a small metal file box. "My niece is on me to digitize," she said with a sigh. "Looks to be about 50 here, Sheriff," Abdi said, glancing at the box. "I can pull out the period strapless gowns we sold. Shouldn't be more than 3 or 4, although I honestly can't tell. As I said, I hate what has been done to this piece, but I have to admire the handiwork, what I can see of it." "Do you take returns?" Abdi asked, still looking through the dresses. "Never. You buy it, you keep it, unless something prevents the marriage from taking place." Abdi and Sam both jerked their heads up. "Did something like that happen, say, 2 years ago?" Sam asked. "The shop was closed 2 years ago," Hattie replied. "I took time off between March and November." She didn't elaborate. "I did let my clients know I planned an extended vacation, and word got around. I sold a record number of dresses over the holiday weeks that preceded my absence." "And you have receipts for that period of time?" Sam tried to keep the eagerness out of her voice. "Of course. Same box, just a little farther back. Let's see. December, 2.5 years ago. What name are you looking for?" "Claire Hooper." Sam and Abdi spoke at the same time. "I remember that name from the news. She was the previous victim." "Oh, no!" Hattie looked stricken. "May I?" Abdi rifled through the cards and pulled one out. "Hooper," he said, holding it aloft. Sam brought up another photo on her phone. "I'm sorry to do this to you again, Hattie, but can you look at this dress and tell me if it's something you might have sold? I realize some time has passed." "Well, I don't forget dresses, Sheriff." Hattie put her glasses back on and studied the picture. "That was our Grace Kelly model. Modest, regal, quite popular in its day. Only a very few brides order that sort of style anymore. Now that I recall, Miss Hooper was planning a traditional church wedding, she sniffed. And this is the dress she was killed in? And buried in, Sam might have added. She never questioned the parents' decision in the matter. Grief worked its own black magic on the psyche. I'm afraid so.
You've been listening to The Wedding Crasher by Nikki Stern. In next week's episode, Terry and Sam team up in person for the first time in several years, and then step in front of the press to make public the possibility of a serial killer in their midst. Tune in on Wednesday for episode 3 of Anne of Green Gables. Marilla is shocked that Anne does not know how to pray, and she's horrified that a near heathen is staying under her roof. Thanks so much for listening. If you like my podcast, please leave me a review and subscribe. I'll see you on Wednesday.